When I was only 12 years old, I learned that the people who share your blood aren't always the ones who protect you. Sometimes they're the ones who destroy you from the inside out. The story I'm about to tell you has been locked away in my heart for over 65 years. It's a story of betrayal so deep that I've never spoken about it to my own children or grandchildren. But today, I'm ready to share it with you. Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Thompson, but most people call me Grandma Maggie. I'm 77 years old, and I was born in Cedar Falls, Iowa, in 1947. What I'm about to tell you happened in a small farming community where everyone knew everyone, where families were supposed to stick together no matter what. But some secrets are too dark to keep buried forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins in the summer of 1959, when the world seemed simpler and childhood felt eternal. We lived on a 40-acre farm just outside Cedar Falls, surrounded by endless cornfields that stretched to the horizon like a golden ocean. Our farmhouse was a 2-story white structure with a wraparound porch, the kind you see in old movies about American farm life. It had been in our family for 3 generations, passed down from my great-grandfather who had built it with his own hands in 1898. My father, William Thompson, was what people called a salt-of-the-earth man. He stood 6 feet tall, with hands that were permanently stained from years of working the soil, and eyes that crinkled at the corners from squinting against the Iowa sun. He raised cattle and corn, working from dawn until well after dusk during the growing season. Papa, as I called him, had a gentle soul despite his rough exterior. He would carry me on his shoulders through the cornfields, teaching me about the different growth stages, showing me how to tell when the corn silk was ready. He had this wonderful laugh that seemed to come from deep in his chest, and when he was happy, his whole face would light up like a Christmas tree. My mother, Dorothy Thompson, was the heart of our home. She was a petite woman with auburn hair that she kept pinned up during the day and let down only at bedtime. Mama had the most beautiful singing voice in 3 counties, and she would hum while she cooked, cleaned, or tended to her vegetable garden. She made everything from scratch: bread that filled the house with the most incredible aroma, preserves from the fruit trees behind our house, and quilts that were works of art. Our neighbors would often say that Dorothy Thompson could make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and they weren't wrong. She had this magical ability to turn our simple farmhouse into something that felt like a palace. But the most significant part of my childhood story involves my twin brothers, Daniel and David Thompson. They were born just 18 months before me in the spring of 1946, and from the moment I could walk, they were my constant companions. Danny and Davy, as everyone called them, were identical in almost every way. They both had Papa's dark brown hair that seemed to have a mind of its own, always sticking up in different directions no matter how much Mama tried to comb it down. They shared the same mischievous green eyes that could sparkle with laughter, one moment and flash with determination the next. Even their voices sounded so similar that sometimes I couldn't tell them apart when they called to me from another room. The twins were inseparable, like 2 halves of the same person. They had developed their own secret language when they were toddlers, speaking in half-sentences and finishing each other's thoughts. They would communicate with just a look or a gesture, understanding each other in ways that seemed almost supernatural. When one got hurt, the other would somehow sense it even if he was in a different part of the farm. When one got in trouble, both would accept the punishment without question, as if they shared not just a birthday, but a single conscience. In those early years, before everything changed, the twins treated me like I was the most precious thing in their world. I was their little sister, their responsibility, their pride and joy. They would wake me up on Saturday mornings with tickle fights that left me gasping with laughter. They taught me how to skip stones in the pond behind our barn, how to catch fireflies in mason jars on summer evenings, and how to whistle through a blade of grass. When I scraped my knee falling off my bicycle, both boys would come running, Danny cleaning the wound while Davy held my hand and told me jokes to stop my tears. Our farm was like a small kingdom where we 3 children ruled during the long summer days. We had secret hideouts in the hayloft of the barn, where we would tell ghost stories and share stolen cookies from Mama's kitchen. We built elaborate forts out of corn stalks and pretended we were explorers discovering new lands. The twins would take turns lifting me up so I could reach the apple tree branches to pick the ripest fruit, and we would sit together under the old oak tree eating our harvest and planning our next adventure. Danny was the more outgoing of the twins, always ready, with a joke or a silly face to make people laugh. He had this infectious energy that could light up any room he entered. He was the one who would convince us to go on the most daring adventures, like sneaking into old Mr. Henderson's orchard to pick pears, or exploring the abandoned barn. On the far edge of our property, despite Mama's warnings about rusty nails and rotting floorboards, Danny was also incredibly protective of me. When Billy Patterson, a boy from town, pushed me off the swings at school, Danny marched right up to him and gave him a black eye. He got suspended for 3 days, but he told Papa it was worth it because nobody should ever hurt his little sister. David was quieter, more thoughtful, but equally devoted to our little family unit. He was the one who remembered my favorite stories and would recite them word for word when I couldn't sleep during thunderstorms. Davy had an artistic streak that none of us expected. He could draw the most incredible pictures of animals and landscapes using nothing but a pencil and paper. He made me a birthday card every year with hand-drawn flowers and birds, and I kept every single one in a special box under my bed. When I had nightmares, Davy would sit by my bedside and tell me elaborate fairy tales he made up on the spot. Stories where the little princess always won and the dragons turned out to be friendly. Our days followed a comfortable rhythm that seemed like it would last forever. Papa would wake us up at sunrise with the sound of him starting the coffee in the kitchen. Mama would have breakfast ready by the time we stumbled downstairs, usually scrambled eggs from our own chickens, bacon from pigs we had raised, and biscuits that were so light they practically floated off the plate. The twins and I would do our morning chores together, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping Papa with the cattle. We turned even the most mundane tasks into games, seeing who could collect the most eggs without breaking any, or racing, to see who could fill their bucket with chicken feed the fastest. After chores, if it was summer, we had the entire day to ourselves. We would pack lunch in an old wicker basket and head out to explore different parts of the farm. Sometimes we would follow the creek that ran along the eastern border of our property, looking for crawdads and minnows. Other times we would climb the big hill on the western side of the farm and pretend we were mountain climbers conquering Everest. The twins would always make sure I was included in everything, never leaving me behind even though I was younger and couldn't always keep up with their longer legs. In the evenings, our family would gather on the front porch after dinner. Papa would sit in his rocking chair, smoking his pipe and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mama would work on her latest quilting project, her fingers moving with the precision of a master craftsman. The twins and I would chase fireflies or play simple card games until the mosquitoes drove us inside. Then we would all gather in the living room, where Papa would read to us from books like Tom Sawyer or Little House on the Prairie, his deep voice bringing the characters to life. Sunday was always special in our house. We would dress in our finest clothes and drive into town for church services at Cedar Falls Methodist. The twins would wear matching suits that Mama had sewn herself, and I would wear one of my good dresses with my hair braided and tied with ribbons. After church, we would visit with neighbors and family friends, and sometimes we would go to the town diner for a special lunch. The twins loved these outings because they could show off their little sister to anyone who would listen, telling people about my latest achievements like learning to read or mastering a new song on the piano. School was another adventure we shared. The twins and I attended Cedar Falls Elementary, a small building that housed all 8 grades in just 4 classrooms. I was in 2nd grade while Danny and Davy were in 4th, but they would always walk me to school in the morning and wait. for me after classes ended. During recess, they would include me in their games with the older kids, making sure nobody picked on the younger students. They were popular boys, good at sports, funny, kind to everyone regardless of their family's social standing. Teachers loved them because they were polite and hardworking, and other parents would often comment to Mama about what fine young men she was raising. But perhaps my most cherished memories from this innocent time were our bedtime rituals. After Mama tucked us all in, the twins would sneak into my room, and we would whisper and giggle until Papa's heavy footsteps on the stairs warned us to be quiet. They would tell me about their plans for the next day, ask me about my dreams and fears, and promise that they would always be there to protect me. Danny would ruffle my hair and call me Maggie Bug, while Davy would kiss my forehead and tell me to have sweet dreams. I felt so safe, so loved, so completely secure in the knowledge that I had two big brothers who would never let anything bad happen to me. The trust I had in them was absolute and unwavering. They were my heroes, my protectors, my best friends, all rolled into one. When other kids at school would tease me about my freckles or my hand-me-down clothes, the twins would defend me fiercely. When I was scared of the dark basement or worried about monsters under my bed, they would brave any danger to prove I was safe. They taught me how to ride a bike, holding onto the back until I found my balance, cheering loudly when I finally rode solo across our yard. They showed me how to whistle, how to tie my shoes properly, how to braid friendship bracelets from colored string. Looking back now, with the wisdom that comes from 7 decades of life, I realize that this period of pure innocence was precious, beyond measure. It was a time when love was simple and trust was complete, when family meant safety and brothers meant protection. The farmhouse was filled with laughter and warmth, and every day brought new adventures and discoveries. I believed, with the absolute certainty that only a child can possess, that this happiness would last forever. I had no way of knowing that everything I trusted, everything I believed about love and family and safety, was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. I couldn't foresee that the two people I loved most in the world, the brothers who had promised to always protect me, would become the source of my deepest pain and darkest memories. But in the summer of 1959, I was still innocent. I was still whole. I was still a little girl who believed that her big brothers hung the moon and stars just for her. And for just a little while longer, that beautiful illusion would remain intact. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that something was changing came on a humid Tuesday morning in late July 1959. I remember the date so clearly because it was the day after my 12th birthday, and I was still wearing the new bracelet that Mama had given me, a delicate silver chain with a tiny heart charm that caught the sunlight as I moved my wrist. The air was thick and oppressive, the kind of weather that made everyone irritable and short-tempered. Even the chickens seemed sluggish as they pecked at their feed in the yard. Papa had left before dawn to drive to Des Moines for a cattle auction. This wasn't unusual. He often made these trips to buy or sell livestock, sometimes staying overnight if the journey was particularly long or if he wanted to attend multiple auctions. But this trip was different because it was the first time he would be gone for 3 full days. The cattle market was experiencing some kind of fluctuation that required Papa to visit several different farms and auction houses to get the best deals for our herd. Mama was excited about a special opportunity that had presented itself. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the wealthiest woman in Cedar Falls, had commissioned her to create a wedding quilt for her daughter's upcoming marriage. This was a huge honor. Mrs. Whitman was known for her exacting standards and had previously hired seamstresses from as far away as Chicago for her family's special occasions. The fact that she had chosen Mama meant recognition that could lead to more commissions from other prominent families in the area. The project required Mama to work at the Whitman estate for several days. using their large dining room table to properly lay out and measure the intricate patterns. Mrs. Whitman had very specific requirements about the colors, the stitching techniques, and the overall design, and she wanted to oversee every step of the process. This meant Mama would be away from our farm from early morning until late evening for the next 3 days, leaving just after breakfast and returning well after dinner time. "Now, you boys take good care of your sister while I'm gone," Mama instructed Danny and Davy as she packed her sewing supplies into her large wicker basket. She was wearing her best dress, a navy blue cotton with tiny white flowers, and had pinned her hair up in her most elegant style. I could tell she was nervous, but excited about this important commission. "Margaret, you mind your brothers and help them with the household chores. There's plenty of food prepared, and I'll be back each evening to check on you all." The twins nodded solemnly, putting on their most responsible expressions. "Don't worry, Mama," Danny said, his voice taking on an unusually mature tone. "We'll take real good care of Maggie, won't we, Davy?" His brother nodded emphatically, but I noticed something strange in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. At the time, I dismissed it as excitement about having more freedom while the adults were away. After Mama left in our old Ford pickup truck, the house felt different somehow, larger, emptier, filled with possibilities that hadn't existed before. The twins and I went about our morning chores as usual, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking on the cattle in the near pasture. But there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't understand. The boys seemed to be communicating with their special twin language more than usual, sharing looks and half-whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I came near. "What are you two planning?" I asked during lunch, when I caught them having another one of their mysterious exchanges. We were sitting at the kitchen table eating the sandwiches Mama had prepared before she left. Thick slices of ham between pieces of her homemade bread, with fresh tomatoes from the garden and crisp lettuce. "Nothing special, Maggie Bug," Danny replied, but his smile seemed forced, different from his usual easy grin. "Just thinking about what we want to do this afternoon since we have the whole place to ourselves." Davy nodded in agreement, but he wouldn't meet my eyes directly. Instead, he focused intently on his sandwich, taking unusually small bites and chewing much longer than necessary. This was strange behavior for both of them. Normally, they were open books to me, sharing every thought and plan without hesitation. After lunch, we went to the barn to check on the new calf that had been born the previous week. The barn was my favorite place on the farm. It smelled of hay and leather and the sweet scent of feed grain. Sunlight streamed through the gaps between the wooden boards, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the floor. The new calf, which I had named Buttercup, was thriving under her mother's care, and I loved to sit and watch her nurse and play. As I knelt beside Buttercup's pen, scratching behind her ears and talking to her in the soft voice I used with all our animals, I became aware that the twins were standing unusually close behind me. Not their normal protective closeness, but something different. Something that made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand up even though I couldn't explain why. "Maggie," Danny said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before, lower, more serious, almost adult. "You're getting to be a real grown-up girl now, aren't you?" I turned around, confused by the strange comment. "What do you mean? I just turned 12 yesterday. I'm still just me." Davy stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, his presence didn't feel comforting. Instead of the warm safety I always felt with my brothers, there was something else. Something that made my stomach feel funny and my heart beat a little faster. "You're changing, though," he said, his green eyes studying me in a way that made me want to step backward. "Haven't you noticed? You're not our little Maggie Bug anymore." I looked down at myself, trying to understand what they meant. I was wearing the same type of clothes I always wore, blue jeans that were getting a bit short on me, and one of Danny's old t-shirts that Mama had hemmed to fit me better. My body had been changing over the past few months. I was getting taller, And Mama had mentioned that we would need to go shopping for some new clothes soon. But I didn't understand why my brothers were bringing this up now, or why their voices sounded so strange. "I don't know what you mean," I said honestly, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Can we just play like we always do? Maybe we could build a new fort in the hayloft?" The twins exchanged another one of their meaningful looks, and I saw Danny give an almost imperceptible nod to Davy. It was the kind of silent communication they had perfected over the years, but this time it felt different, secretive in a way that excluded me rather than including me in their special bond. "Sure, Maggie," Danny said, his voice returning to something closer to normal. "Let's go up to the loft. We want to show you something new we've been working on up there." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This sounded more like the brothers I knew and loved. They were always creating new hideouts and secret projects in different parts of the barn and farm buildings. I followed them eagerly up the wooden ladder to the hayloft, my earlier discomfort already beginning to fade. The hayloft was one of our most treasured spaces. Papa had stored several dozen bales of hay from the early summer cutting, creating natural walls and passages that we had turned into an elaborate play area. Over the years, we had furnished it, with old blankets, pillows that Mama no longer needed, and various treasures we had collected, interesting rocks, bird feathers, pictures torn from magazines. It was our private kingdom, away from adult supervision and responsibilities. But when I reached the top of the ladder, I noticed that the space had been rearranged. The blankets were spread out differently, creating what looked almost like a room rather than our usual scattered play areas. Someone had brought up some of the oil lamps that we used during power outages, giving the space a softer, more intimate lighting than the harsh sunlight that usually filtered through the gaps in the barn walls. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed, despite my earlier uneasiness. "This looks really nice. When did you do all this?" "We've been working on it for a few weeks," Davy explained, his voice sounding more relaxed now that we were in familiar territory. "We wanted to surprise you. It's like our own special grown-up clubhouse now." I walked around the newly arranged space, admiring the improvements they had made. They had even brought up some books and what looked like snacks wrapped in cloth. Napkins. It really did feel more sophisticated than our usual play areas, less like children's fort and more like a real room where teenagers might hang out. "This is really great," I told them sincerely. "But why did you make it so different?" Danny sat down on one of the larger blankets and patted the space beside him. "Come sit with us, Maggie. We want to talk to you about some important things. Grown-up things." Something in his tone made me hesitate. The uncomfortable feeling from earlier returned, stronger this time. But these were my brothers, the people who loved me most in the world besides Mama and Papa. They had never done anything to hurt me or make me feel unsafe. Surely I was just being silly, letting my imagination run away with me. I sat down where Danny had indicated, with Davy settling on my other side. For a moment, we just sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the farm around us, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirping of birds in the rafters above us, the gentle creaking of the old barn settling in the summer heat. "Maggie," Davy began, his voice unusually serious, "now that you're 12, there are things you need to learn about, things that happen between boys and girls when they get older." My face grew warm with embarrassment. Mama and I had had some awkward conversations about the changes my body would go through as I grew up, but she had assured me that we would talk more about other things when I was older. I certainly hadn't expected my brothers to bring up such topics. "I don't think this is something we should talk about," I said quietly, starting to get up from the blanket. "Maybe I should ask Mama about this stuff when she gets home." But Danny's hand shot out and gently but firmly caught my wrist, preventing me from standing. "Wait, Maggie," he said, his voice taking on that strange adult tone again. "Mama doesn't need to know about everything. Some things are just between brothers and sisters, special things that families do together. The feeling in my stomach was getting worse. Not exactly fear, but a kind of nervous confusion that I had never experienced before. Part of me wanted to trust my brothers completely, the way I always had. But another part, some instinct I didn't fully understand, was telling me that something was wrong with this situation. "I want to go back to the house," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident even though my heart was beating faster. "I don't want to talk about this anymore." Davy's hand joined Danny's, both of them now holding my arms in a way that felt less like affection and more like restraint. "Just listen for a minute, Maggie," Davy said, his voice soft but insistent. "We love you so much, and we want to teach you things that will help you understand how special you are, how special our family is." The light filtering through the barn walls suddenly seemed dimmer, and the cozy clubhouse atmosphere that had impressed me moments before now felt confining and threatening. I realized that we were far from the house, far from any neighbors who might hear if I called for help. Not that I thought I needed help. These were my brothers, after all. But the thought crossed my mind anyway, and that fact alone scared me. "Please let go of my arms," I said, my voice beginning to shake despite my efforts to stay calm. "I want to go back to the house and wait for Mama to come home." The twins looked at each other again, having another of their silent conversations. But this time, instead of the playful conspiracy I was used to seeing, there was something darker in their exchange, something that made me understand, with a clarity that was both sudden and terrible, that my safe and innocent world was about to change forever. "We can't let you leave just yet, Maggie," Danny said, his voice now completely different from any tone he had ever used with me before. "Not until we've shown you how much we love you, how much we've always loved you." And in that moment, sitting in the hayloft that had been my refuge and playground, surrounded by the two people I trusted most in the world, I realized that I was in danger. Real danger. The kind that I had never imagined could come from within. My own family. The golden afternoon light that had seemed so beautiful just minutes before now felt like a spotlight illuminating my vulnerability. And somewhere deep in my 12-year-old mind, I understood that whatever was about to happen would change everything. Not just for that day, but for the rest of my life. What happened next in that hayloft is something I've carried like a stone in my chest for 65 years. Even now, as an old woman with gray hair and weathered hands, my body remembers every detail with a clarity that sometimes makes me wish I could forget. But forgetting would mean letting them win, and I refuse to give them that power. Danny's grip on my left wrist tightened, while Davy's fingers dug into my right arm just above the elbow. They weren't hurting me yet, not physically, but the pressure was firm enough to let me know that this wasn't a game anymore. The brothers I had loved and trusted were gone, replaced by strangers wearing familiar faces. "Maggie, you need to stop fighting this," Danny said, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, patient but commanding, like Papa when he was training a stubborn horse. "We're going to teach you things that sisters need to learn from their big brothers. Things that will make you feel good." I tried to pull away, but their combined strength was too much for my 12-year-old body. Panic was rising in my throat, like bile, making it hard to breathe. "This isn't right," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heartbeat. "Brothers and sisters don't. We're not supposed to—" "Says who?" Davy interrupted, his green eyes, once so kind and reassuring, now cold and calculating. "Says Mama? Says Papa? They don't understand the special bond we have, Maggie. They don't understand how much we love each other." The word love coming from his mouth in that context made my stomach lurch. This wasn't love. This felt like the opposite of everything I had ever understood love to be. Love was gentle and safe and made you feel protected. This felt dangerous and wrong and made every instinct in my body scream for escape. Please, I begged, tears starting to blur my vision. Please don't do this. I won't tell anyone about whatever this is, I promise. Just let me go back to the house. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see in their faces that begging wouldn't help. There was a determination there, a resolve that told me they had been planning this moment for longer than I could imagine. The special looks they had been sharing, the whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. It had all been leading to this. Danny reached up and brushed a tear from my cheek with his free hand, the gesture a mockery of the gentle comfort he used to provide. When I was hurt or scared, "Don't cry, Maggie Bug," he said, using my childhood nickname in a way that made it sound dirty. "You're going to like this. We're going to make sure you like it." What happened next is difficult to put into words, even after all these years. They were careful, methodical, taking turns in a way that suggested they had discussed every detail beforehand. Danny would hold me while Davy touched me in ways that made my skin crawl, and then they would switch positions. They spoke to me throughout the ordeal, telling me how much they loved me, how special I was, how this was normal for families who really cared about each other. I tried to escape into my mind, the way I did during thunderstorms or when Papa had to give the animals their shots. I imagined I was flying over the cornfields, soaring high above the farm where nothing could touch me. But their voices kept pulling me back to that hayloft, to the reality of what was happening to my body. "See how your body responds, Maggie?" Davy whispered in my ear, his breath hot and wrong against my skin. "See how it knows this is right, even if your mind is confused?" I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but I felt paralyzed by shock and disbelief. These were my brothers, the boys who had protected me from bullies, who had comforted me during nightmares, who had promised they would never let anything bad happen to me. How could they be doing this? How could their hands, which had once braided my hair and bandaged my scraped knees, now be causing me such confusion and pain? The physical violation was terrible enough, but the psychological assault was even worse. They worked together to convince me that I was enjoying it, that my body's involuntary responses meant I wanted what they were doing. They told me that this was how all families showed love when no one else was around to see. They said that Mama and Papa wouldn't understand because they were old-fashioned, but that this was actually beautiful and natural. "You can't tell anyone about this, Maggie," Danny said when they had finally finished with me for that first time. I was curled up on the blanket, shaking and trying to process what had just happened. "No one would believe you anyway. Who's going to believe that the Thompson twins, honor roll students, star athletes, everyone's favorite boys, would do something like this?" Davy nodded in agreement, straightening his clothes and running his hands through his hair to restore his normal appearance. "Besides," he added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "if you tell, we'll just say you're the one who came on to us. That you've been acting strange and inappropriate. Who do you think people will believe? Their golden boys or the weird little sister who's always been different?" The threat hung in the air between us like a poisonous cloud. I knew they were. Right. Danny and Davy were beloved in our community. Teachers praised them, neighbors admired them, other parents held them up as examples of what young men should be. I was just the quiet little sister, the tag-along who spent too much time with animals and books. They helped me get dressed, their touches now clinical and efficient rather than violating. Danny even helped me re-braid my hair, which had come undone, during the struggle. To anyone looking at us, we would appear to be the same loving siblings we had always been. "Remember, Maggie," Davy said as we climbed down from the hayloft, "this is our special secret. This is how our family shows love. And we're going to have lots more opportunities to show you how much we love you while Papa's away." The walk back to the farmhouse felt like a death march. My legs were shaky, and there was a soreness between my thighs that made each step a reminder of what had just happened. The familiar sights of our property, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden, the old oak tree where we had played countless games, now looked foreign and threatening. It was as if the entire world had shifted while we were in the barn, and nothing would ever look the same again. Inside the house, the twins acted as if nothing had happened. Danny turned on the radio and began humming along to a popular song while he cleaned up our lunch dishes. Davy settled into Papa's chair, with a book, looking for all the world like a normal 14-year-old boy spending a quiet afternoon at home. Their ability to return to normalcy so quickly was almost as disturbing as what they had done to me. I went upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door, something I had never felt the need to do before. I sat on my bed, staring at the familiar, pink wallpaper with its pattern of tiny rosebuds, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This was my room, my safe space, but it no longer felt safe. Nothing felt safe anymore. I could hear the twins moving around downstairs, their voices carrying up through the floorboards as they discussed what to make for dinner. They sounded so normal, so much like the brothers I had always known, that I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had fallen asleep in the hayloft and had a terrible nightmare. Maybe my mind had invented the entire horrible experience. But the soreness in my body told a different story. The taste in my mouth, the smell that seemed to cling to my skin despite washing my hands and face. These were real. The way my brothers had looked at me, the things they had said, the careful coordination of their actions. None of it had been a dream. When evening came and Mama returned from her day at the Whitman estate, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to work on a jigsaw puzzle. The twins were in the living room playing checkers, their laughter drifting into the kitchen like the sound of normal, happy children. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Mama asked, kissing the top of my head, as she set down her sewing basket. She looked tired but pleased, her cheeks flushed with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Did you and your brothers have a good time together?" I opened my mouth to tell her everything, about the hayloft, about what Danny and Davy had done, about how scared and confused I felt. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Yes, Mama, we had a fine day." "That's wonderful," she said, moving to the stove to check on the pot roast she had left cooking slowly all day. "Mrs. Whitman is very pleased with the work so far. She says it's the finest stitching she's ever seen. This commission could really help our family, Margaret." I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the happy daughter while my world crumbled around me. How could I tell Mama what had happened when she was so excited about this opportunity? How could I destroy her joy with my horrible news? And what if the twins were right? What if no one would believe me? That night, I lay in bed listening to every sound in the house. When I heard footsteps in the hallway, my entire body tensed with fear. But the footsteps passed by my door without stopping, and eventually the house settled into its normal nighttime, quiet. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danny and Davy's faces as they had looked in the hayloft. Not like my loving brothers, but like strangers wearing masks. I thought about tomorrow and the day after that, knowing that Papa wouldn't return for 2 more days. Knowing that Mama would be gone again, working on her important commission. Knowing that I would be alone with the twins again. The clock on my nightstand ticked away the hours as I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out how my perfect world had collapsed so completely in the span of a single afternoon. The brothers, who had been my protectors, had become my predators. The home that had been my sanctuary had become my prison. And the trust that had been the foundation of my entire existence had been shattered beyond repair. As dawn approached, I heard movement. Downstairs, Mama preparing for another day at the Whitman estate. Soon she would be gone again, and I would be left alone with Danny and Davy. And despite their promises that I would learn to like what they did to me, despite their insistence that this was normal and beautiful, I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of my nightmare. The second day was worse than the first, because now I knew what was coming. I woke up that Wednesday morning with a stomach full of dread, the kind of sick feeling you get when you know something terrible is about to happen, but you're powerless to stop it. The summer sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, which had always been a source of joy and comfort, now felt like a spotlight illuminating my helplessness. Mama left even earlier that morning, excited because Mrs. Whitman wanted to show the partially completed quilt to her daughter who was arriving from Chicago. She kissed my forehead and reminded me to be good for my brothers, never suspecting that those very brothers were the source of my terror. "I should be home by 8 tonight," she called from the kitchen as she gathered her supplies. "There's leftover chicken in the icebox for lunch, and I've prepared a casserole for dinner. You children take care of each other." The sound of the pickup truck driving away felt like a death sentence. I stayed in my room as long as I could, pretending to sleep even as I heard the twins moving around downstairs. But eventually, the call of nature forced me to leave my sanctuary. When I crept downstairs to use the bathroom, I found them waiting for me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with cups of coffee like a pair of adults planning their day. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Danny said, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that I was learning to recognize as a warning sign. "We've been talking about all the fun things we can do today." Davy smiled at me over his coffee cup, but his eyes held a predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. "We thought we might explore some different parts of the farm today. Maybe the old storage shed behind the apple orchard. It's nice and private back there." I tried to run. The moment I heard his words, every instinct in my body screamed at me to flee. I bolted for the front door, my bare feet slapping against the wooden floor, but Danny was faster. He caught me before I even reached the living room, his arms wrapping around my waist and lifting me off the ground despite my struggles. Now, Maggie," he said, his voice maddeningly calm as I fought against his grip. "That's no way to treat your loving brothers. We just want to spend some quality time with you." They carried me kicking and screaming to the storage shed, a small wooden building that Papa used to store old farm equipment and seasonal supplies. It was far enough from the main house and road that no one would hear my cries, surrounded by apple trees that created a natural barrier from prying eyes. Inside, the air was thick and dusty, filled with the scent of old wood and rust. What they did to me in that shed was more deliberate and prolonged than the day before. They had brought supplies, old blankets to make the dirt floor more comfortable, rope to tie my wrists when I wouldn't stop fighting, even a jar of water so I wouldn't get dehydrated during the hours they kept me there. "You see, Maggie?" Davy said as he methodically removed my clothes while Danny held my arms. "We've thought of everything. We want to make sure you're comfortable while we show you how much we love you." The word love had become a weapon in their mouths, twisted and perverted until it meant the opposite of everything I had ever believed about that emotion. They used it constantly during the assault, telling me they loved me as they violated my body, insisting that this was how families expressed their deepest affection. But it was the psychological torture that cut deepest. They had developed an elaborate system of justification that they repeated like a religious catechism. They told me that what we were doing was actually happening in families all across Iowa, all across America. They said that the only difference was that other families were too ashamed to admit it, too hypocritical to acknowledge the natural love between siblings. "Think about it, Maggie," Danny said during one of their rest periods, as I lay curled up on the blanket trying to disappear into myself. "Who knows you better than we do? Who loves you more? Some stranger you might marry someday? Or the brothers who've been with you since the day you were born?" They painted elaborate fantasies about our future together, describing how we would always be a family unit, how I would never need to leave the farm or find a husband because I already had everything I needed right here. They talked about the children I would have someday, their children, and how perfect our family would be. "You'll never have to worry about some man hurting you or leaving you," Davy explained, stroking my hair with a gentleness that was obscene given what he had just done to my body. "We'll always be here. We'll always take care of you. You'll always be our special girl." The hours in that shed passed like years. Time became meaningless when measured only by pain and violation. The twins took turns, one always fresh while the other rested, ensuring that my torment was constant and unrelenting. They were patient, methodical, treating my body like a puzzle they were determined to solve. When they finally allowed me to return to the house, the sun was already beginning to set. I was barely conscious, my body racked with pain and my mind floating in a protective haze of dissociation. They carried me to the bathroom and cleaned me up, washing away the evidence of their crimes with the same gentle care they had once shown when treating my scraped knees. "There you go, Maggie Bug," Danny said as he helped me into clean clothes. "Good as new. Mama will never know anything happened." But I knew. My body knew. Every cell in my being screamed with the knowledge of what had been done to me. When Mama returned that evening, flushed with success from another productive day at the Whitman estate, I could barely look at her. How could she not see the change in me? How could she not smell the shame and violation that I was sure must be radiating from my skin? "You're very quiet tonight, sweetheart," she observed during dinner, as I pushed food around my plate without eating. "Are you feeling well?" "Just tired, Mama," I managed to whisper, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. The twins jumped in immediately with their explanations. "We had a big day exploring the farm," Davy said helpfully. "Maggie got a little too much sun, I think." "We made sure she drank plenty of water," Danny added, playing the part of the concerned big brother with sickening perfection. "But you know how she is when she gets overtired." Mama nodded sympathetically and suggested I go to bed early. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard her praising the boys for taking such good care of their little sister. The irony was so bitter I thought I might vomit. That night, the nightmares began in earnest. I would drift off to sleep only to jerk awake screaming, my body drenched in sweat and my heart pounding with terror. The dreams were filled with images of hands reaching for me, voices whispering my name, the smell of that storage shed mixing with the scent of apple blossoms. When I woke up screaming for the third time, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My door opened, and Davy appeared, silhouetted against the light from the hall. For a moment, I thought he was coming to comfort me the way he used to when I had bad dreams. But then I saw the expression on his face, not concern, but satisfaction. "Having bad dreams, Maggie?" he asked, stepping into my room and closing the door behind him. "Maybe you need someone to help you feel safe." "No," I whispered, shrinking back against my headboard. "Please, no. Not here. Not in my room." But he kept coming, moving toward my bed with that same predatory grace I had learned to fear. "Everywhere is our room now, little sister. The whole farm belongs to us, and so do you." He climbed into my bed that night, violating the last sanctuary I had left. My own bedroom, the place where I had felt safest in the entire world, became just another location for their crimes. From that night forward, I would never feel truly safe anywhere. The third day was a blur of repeated horror. They were becoming bolder, more inventive, taking me to different locations around the farm like they were conducting a tour of violation. The chicken coop, the root cellar, even the front porch of the house while Mama was away. Nowhere was sacred anymore. But it was that afternoon, when Papa's truck finally appeared on the horizon, that I learned the full extent of their psychological manipulation. As we watched him drive up the dusty road toward our house, Danny put his arm around my shoulders in what would look like brotherly affection to any observer. "Remember, Maggie," he said quietly, his voice filled with false tenderness. "Papa can never know about our special time together. It would kill him to know that his precious little princess isn't pure anymore. It would destroy our family." Davy nodded solemnly from my other side. "Think about what it would do to Mama, too. All her dreams about her perfect children, ruined. She might never recover from the shame. They had found the perfect weapon against me. My own love for my parents. They knew that I would do anything to protect Mama and Papa from pain, even if it meant sacrificing myself. They had turned my capacity for love into a chain that bound me to their will. When Papa climbed out of his truck, tired but smiling from his successful trip to Des Moines, I ran to him as I always did. He swept me up in his arms, spinning me around while I breathed in the familiar scent of his aftershave and tobacco. For a moment, in the safety of his embrace, I felt like I might be able to tell him everything. "How's my princess?" he asked, setting me down and studying my face with loving eyes. "Did you miss your old Papa?" The words were right there on my tongue. "Papa, something terrible happened. Danny and Davy hurt me. They did things to me that brothers shouldn't do." But then I saw my brothers watching from the porch, their faces masks of innocence but their eyes holding clear warnings. "I missed you so much, Papa," I said instead, the lie tasting like poison in my mouth. "But the boys took real good care of me." Papa beamed with pride, turning to wave at his sons. "That's my boys," he called out. "I knew I could count on you to protect your little sister." As we walked toward the house together, Papa's arm around my shoulders and the twins flanking us on either side, we must have looked like the picture of a perfect farm family. No one could have guessed that beneath the surface, everything had changed forever. That night, as our family sat around the dinner table sharing stories about our respective 3 days apart, I began to understand that I was completely and utterly alone. The twins had constructed an elaborate facade of normalcy that would be impossible to penetrate without destroying everything I held dear. They had turned my love for my family into a weapon against me, and I was trapped with no way out. The weeks following Papa's return were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I didn't have the vocabulary to understand it at the time. The twins had learned that they could maintain their campaign of terror, even with our parents present, using silence, looks, and carefully timed touches to keep me in a constant state of fear and submission. At breakfast, Danny would brush against me as he reached for the syrup, his hand lingering just a moment too long on my shoulder. To Mama and Papa, it looked like normal sibling affection. To me, it was a reminder that my body belonged to them now, that they could touch me whenever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and no one would question it. Davy perfected the art of the meaningful glance. Across the dinner table, while Papa talked about cattle prices and Mama discussed her latest quilting commission, Davy would catch my eye and smile that cold smile that never reached his eyes. Sometimes he would slowly run his tongue across his lips or make a subtle gesture that reminded me of what they had done to me in the storage shed. These moments lasted only seconds, but they were enough to make my appetite disappear, and my hands shake so badly I could barely hold my fork. The twins also developed a system of verbal codes that allowed them to communicate their intentions right in front of our parents. "Hey, Maggie," Danny might say during lunch. "Want to help us check on the new fence post this afternoon? We could use an extra pair of hands." To Mama and Papa, this sounded like the boys being responsible and including their sister in farm work. To me, it was a command disguised as a request, an announcement that I would be spending the afternoon being violated in some remote corner of our property. School became my only refuge, but even that sanctuary was tainted by their presence. Danny and Davy were in 8th grade while I was in 6th, but our small rural school meant we shared the same building, the same hallways, the same bus ride, to and from home. They positioned themselves as my protectors in public, warning other boys away from me with a possessiveness that teachers and parents interpreted as brotherly love. "Nobody messes with our little sister," Danny would say if any boy my age tried to talk to me during recess. The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and word quickly spread that Margaret Thompson was off limits. What no one understood was that they weren't protecting me from other boys. They were protecting their exclusive access to me. The isolation was carefully orchestrated. Gradually, I stopped being invited to sleepovers and birthday parties. When friends called to make plans, the twins would answer the phone and politely explain that I was busy helping with farm chores. They intercepted invitations and declined them on my behalf, always with reasonable explanations that made me seem responsible and family-oriented rather than isolated and controlled. "Margaret's such a good girl," I overheard Mrs. Patterson telling Mama at church one Sunday. "Always putting family first. You're so lucky to have such devoted children." If only she knew what that devotion really looked like. The physical abuse continued whenever opportunities presented themselves. Papa's work on the farm often took him to distant fields for hours at a time. Mama's quilting business was growing, requiring more trips to clients' homes and longer hours spent in town purchasing supplies. The twins mapped these absences with military precision, creating schedules of when they could access me without risk of discovery. They varied their methods to keep me off balance. Sometimes it was quick and brutal, grabbing me when I went to collect eggs and having their way with me in the chicken coop before I could even cry out. Other times it was prolonged psychological torture, where they would spend hours talking to me about their fantasies for our future together, describing in graphic detail what they planned to do to me when we were all grown up and living together permanently. "You'll never leave this farm, Maggie," Davy told me one afternoon as we sat in the hayloft where it had all begun. "Why would you want to? You have everything you need right here. You have us." They began to groom me for a future that existed only in their twisted imaginations. They talked about how I would never date other boys, never go to college, never move away from Cedar Falls. Instead, I would stay on the farm and be their wife. Both of their wives, they explained, since they shared everything and always had. "Think about it," Danny said, his voice taking on that dreamy quality he used when describing their vision of our future. "Other girls have to choose between different boys, never knowing if they're making the right decision. You'll never have that problem. You'll have both of us, forever. We'll take care of you, protect you, love you the way no husband ever could." The scariest part was how they seemed to genuinely believe their own delusions. They weren't just abusing me for their own gratification. They truly thought they were doing something loving and beautiful. In their minds, they were rescuing me from the uncertainty and potential heartbreak of normal relationships by providing me with guaranteed eternal love. My body began to show the signs of chronic stress and trauma. I developed a stutter that appeared whenever I was nervous or frightened, which was increasingly often. My hair started falling out in patches, leaving small bald spots that Mama attributed to a vitamin deficiency. I lost weight rapidly, my clothes hanging loose on my shrinking frame as my appetite disappeared entirely. Sleep became elusive and fragmented. The nightmares that had started during those first 3 days of abuse evolved into a nightly horror show. I would dream of being chased through endless cornfields, always running but never escaping. I would dream of hands reaching for me from dark corners, voices calling my name from empty rooms. Sometimes I would wake up to find I had wet the bed, something that hadn't happened since I was a toddler. Mama noticed the changes but attributed them to typical preteen struggles. "It's normal for girls her age to have some difficulties," I overheard her telling Mrs. Henderson when they thought I wasn't listening. "Her body is changing. Her emotions are all over the place. She'll outgrow it." Papa was more concerned, especially about my weight loss and the dark circles under my eyes. "Princess, are you feeling sick?" he would ask, pressing his hand to my forehead to check for fever. "You look so tired all the time." I wanted so desperately to tell him the truth. The words would rise in my throat like a scream, begging to be released. But then I would see the twins watching from across the room, their faces masks of innocent concern, and I would remember their warnings about what would happen if I destroyed our family's happiness. The twins reinforced their control through a careful campaign of gaslighting that made me question my own perceptions of reality. When I tried to avoid being alone with them, they would act hurt and confused. "What's wrong with Maggie lately?" Danny would ask Mama within my hearing. She used to love spending time with us, but now she acts like she's scared of us or something." "Maybe she's just going through a phase," Mama would reply, looking at me with worried eyes. "Some girls get funny about boys when they start developing, even their own brothers." "That's silly," Davy would add, his voice dripping with false innocence. "We're family. There's nothing to be scared of. We love her." These conversations would inevitably lead to family discussions about the importance of sibling bonds and how much the twins loved and worried about me. Papa would give speeches about how lucky I was to have such caring older brothers, how some girls didn't have anyone to protect them from the dangers of the world. "Your brothers would do anything for you, Princess," Papa told me one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset. "They're good boys, raised right. They'll always look out for their little sister." The irony was so bitter it made me physically ill, but I just nodded and smiled, playing the part of the grateful sister while dying inside. The twins also used my love for our family pets as another weapon of control. We had several barn cats, a loyal farm dog named Rex, and various chickens that I had raised from chicks and given individual names. The twins began making subtle threats about what might happen to these animals if I didn't cooperate with their demands. "It would be such a shame if something happened to Buttercup," Davy mentioned casually one day as we walked past the calf pen. "Calves can be so accident-prone. Sometimes they get tangled up in fence wire, or fall into the pond, or eat something poisonous." The message was clear. My silence bought safety not just for myself and my parents, but for every living thing I cared about on our farm. They had identified every source of love in my life and turned it into a potential victim of their wrath. As autumn approached and I prepared to start 7th grade, I realized that my situation was not temporary. This was not something I would simply endure until the twins grew tired of me or found other interests. They had constructed an elaborate system of control that encompassed every aspect of my existence, and they showed no signs of ever releasing me from it. The girl who had once been the beloved baby sister, protected and cherished by her older brothers, no longer existed. In her place was a hollow shell, a performance of normalcy covering up an ever-growing darkness. I had learned to smile on command, to laugh at appropriate moments, to play the role of the happy farm daughter while my soul slowly died inside. But, perhaps most tragically of all, I was beginning to forget what normal felt like. The twins' version of love was becoming my baseline, their twisted logic seeping into my understanding of relationships and family bonds. When they told me that what we did together was beautiful and special, part of me was starting to believe them simply because the alternative, acknowledging the full horror of my situation, was too painful to bear. As I prepared for another school year, another season of careful pretense and hidden suffering, I had no way of knowing that my carefully constructed prison was about to develop some unexpected cracks. The beginning of my 7th grade year in September 1959 brought an unexpected complication to the twins' carefully orchestrated system of control. A new family had moved to Cedar Falls over the summer, the Andersons, who had purchased the old Miller property adjacent to our farm. They brought with them a daughter named Sarah, who was exactly my age and would be in my class at school. Sarah Anderson was everything I used to be before my world collapsed: bright, confident, outgoing, and completely unafraid of the world around her. She had lived in 3 different states because her father was a traveling salesman who had finally decided to settle down in Iowa. This meant she had experiences and perspectives that were completely foreign to our small, insular farming community. Antarctica. Her first day at Cedar Falls Elementary, Sarah was assigned the seat next to mine in Mrs. Parker's 7th grade classroom. While the other students whispered and stared at the newcomer, Sarah turned to me with a genuine smile and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Sarah Anderson. I just moved here from Kansas. Are you Margaret? Mrs. Parker said you might be able to show me around and help me catch up on what I've missed." For a moment, I was struck speechless. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me directly, sought out my company, or seemed genuinely interested in being my friend. The twins' isolation campaign had been so effective that I had almost forgotten what normal social interaction felt like. "Yes, I'm Margaret," I managed to whisper, glancing nervously toward the back of the classroom where Danny and Davy sat with the 8th graders. I could feel their eyes boring into me, even though I couldn't see their faces. "Margaret Thompson." Thompson. Sarah's face lit up with recognition. "Your family owns the farm next to ours. My dad mentioned your father when we were moving in. He said William Thompson was one of the most respected farmers in the county." The pride in her voice when she mentioned Papa made something warm flicker in my chest, an emotion I had almost forgotten how to feel. For the first time in months, I felt a tiny spark of the girl I used to be, the girl who loved her family and was proud of our farm and our place in the community. At lunch, Sarah made a point of sitting with me, even though several of the more popular girls had invited her to their table. "I'd rather sit with you," she said simply. "You seem nice, and besides, I hate all that gossipy stuff. In Kansas, the popular girls were just mean." As we ate our sandwiches, Sarah peppered me with questions about the school, the teachers, and life in Cedar Falls. But she also shared stories about her previous homes, describing cities and experiences that seemed almost magical to someone who had never been more than 50 miles from the place she was born. "In Colorado, we lived near the mountains," she told me, her eyes sparkling with memory. "On clear days, you could see peaks that were covered with snow even in the middle of summer. And in Kansas, the sunsets were so big and beautiful that they made you feel like you could see forever." I found myself hanging on every word, hungry for these glimpses of a world beyond Cedar Falls, beyond the suffocating boundaries of my current existence. For 30 precious minutes, I almost forgot about the twins watching us from across the cafeteria, about the threats and manipulation that governed my every waking moment. But reality came crashing back when the lunch bell rang and we had to return to our classrooms. As Sarah and I walked down the hallway together, laughing about something silly she had said, Danny appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Hey there, Maggie," he said, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that I had learned to dread. "Who's your new friend?" "This is Sarah Anderson," I replied, my voice automatically becoming smaller and more hesitant. "She just moved here from Kansas. Sarah, this is my brother Danny." Danny flashed Sarah his most charming smile, the one that had fooled countless adults and made him popular with girls throughout the school. "Welcome to Cedar Falls, Sarah. I hope my little sister is taking good care of you. She's pretty shy, but she's a good kid." The casual dismissal in his tone, calling me a good kid like I was a pet or a younger child rather than someone less than 2 years his junior, was clearly intended to diminish me in Sarah's eyes. But Sarah seemed unimpressed by Danny's charm offensive. "Actually, Margaret's been wonderful," Sarah replied coolly. "She's smart and funny and she knows everything about this place. I'm lucky to have her as a friend." Something flickered in Danny's eyes at Sarah's response. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that his usual charm wasn't working on this newcomer. "Well, that's great," he said, his smile becoming slightly strained. "Just remember, if you need anything at all, you can always come to me or my twin brother Davy. We look out for all the girls in this school." The subtle threat in his words was lost on Sarah, but it hit me like a physical blow. He was warning her, and warning me, that their protection extended beyond just their little sister. Any girl who got too close to me might find herself under their unwanted attention. That afternoon on the bus ride home, I sat with Sarah again, listening to her chatter about her impressions of our school and teachers. But I was acutely aware of the twins sitting several seats behind us, close enough to hear every word we said. When Sarah suggested that we should get together over the weekend to work on homework or just hang out, I felt my stomach clench with fear. "I don't know if I can," I said quietly. "My parents keep me pretty busy with farm chores on weekends." "Well, maybe I could come over and help," Sarah suggested brightly. "I've never lived on a real farm before." It might be fun to learn about taking care of animals and growing things. The idea of Sarah coming to our farm, being in the same space, where the twins had violated me in so many different locations, filled me with panic. "No," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I mean, it's not very interesting. Just a lot of dirty work. You wouldn't like it." Sarah looked hurt by my quick rejection, and I hated myself for putting that wounded expression on her face. But how could I explain that I was trying to protect her? How could I tell her that bringing her into my world might expose her to the same horrors I endured daily? When we got off the bus at our respective stops, Sarah waved goodbye with less enthusiasm than she had shown earlier. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the beginning of doubt about whether I was really the friend she had hoped to find. That evening at dinner, Davy mentioned the new girl with studied casualness. "I hear Maggie made a new friend today. Sarah, something or other from the Anderson family." "Anderson?" Papa looked up from his meatloaf with interest. "Good people. I met Robert Anderson when they were looking at the Miller place. He's got a good head for business, and his wife seems like a nice lady. Their daughter is Margaret's age?" "Yes, sir," Danny replied before I could speak. "Pretty girl. Very friendly. She seems to have taken quite a shine to our Maggie." "The way," he said, "our Maggie," made my skin crawl. But to Papa, it probably sounded like normal brotherly pride. "That's wonderful, Princess," Papa said, smiling at me across the table. "You've been so quiet lately. It'll be good for you to have a friend. Your own age." Mama nodded in agreement. "Maybe you could invite her over sometime. I'd love to meet her, and I'm sure she'd enjoy seeing how we do things on the farm." I felt the twins' eyes boring into me from across the table, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. They were imagining Sarah here, in their territory, under their control. The thought made me feel sick. "Maybe," I mumbled, focusing on my plate. "We'll see." But I had already made up my mind. I couldn't let Sarah get too close. I couldn't risk exposing her to the twins' attention, and I couldn't bear the thought of her discovering my shameful secret. It was better to hurt her feelings now than to put her in danger later. Over the next few weeks, I began the painful process of pushing Sarah away. When she suggested study sessions, I claimed I was too busy. When she invited me to her house, I made excuses about farm chores. When she tried to sit with me at lunch, I started arriving late and sitting at tables that were already full. Sarah was persistent at first, clearly confused by my sudden coldness. "Did I do something wrong, Margaret?" she asked me one day after school. "I thought we were becoming friends, but now you act like you don't want to be around me." The hurt in her voice almost broke my resolve. I wanted so desperately to tell her the truth, to explain that I was pushing her away to protect her, not because I didn't like her. But how could I explain without revealing everything? "I'm just busy," I said weakly. "Farm life is different from what you're used to. I don't really have time for friendships." "But everyone needs friends," Sarah protested. "And you seem so lonely, Margaret. Sometimes I see you at lunch just sitting by yourself, and you look so sad. I just want to help." Her kindness was like a knife twisting in my heart. Here was someone who genuinely cared about me, who saw my pain and wanted to help, and I was driving her away to protect secrets that were destroying me from the inside. "I'm fine," I insisted, my voice becoming harder. "I don't need help, and I don't need friends. Just leave me alone." I saw the exact moment when Sarah's concern turned to hurt, and then to anger. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "If that's how you want it, Margaret Thompson. I was trying to be nice, but if you want to be a miserable hermit, that's your choice." She walked away without looking back, and I stood there watching her go, feeling like I had just thrown away the only lifeline I had been offered in months. But what choice did I have? The twins had made it clear that anyone who got too close to me would become a target. I couldn't live with the guilt of knowing I had brought their attention to an innocent girl who was just trying to be kind. That night, I cried harder than I had since the abuse began, not just for myself, but for the friendship I had sacrificed, for the normal teenage relationship I would never be able to have. The twins had taken my body, my sense of safety, my trust in family, and now they had taken my ability to connect, with peers as well. I was completely and utterly alone, trapped in a web of shame and silence that seemed to grow tighter every day. And as I lay in my bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the farm at night, I began to wonder if this isolation, this constant fear and violation, would be my reality forever. By November 1959, my body was showing signs that even my parents couldn't ignore anymore. The weight loss had accelerated to the point where my clothes hung on me like sacks, and dark circles under my eyes made me look like a ghost haunting our farmhouse. But it was the morning when I collapsed during chores that everything began to unravel. I was feeding the chickens, the same routine I had done thousands of times before, when suddenly the world tilted sideways. The feed bucket slipped from my hands as I crumpled to the ground, scattering corn kernels across the dirt while the chickens clucked and pecked around my unconscious form. Papa found me there 20 minutes later, unconscious in the chicken yard with blood trickling from where my head had struck a stone. "Dorothy!" Papa's voice boomed across the farmyard as he carried my limp body toward the house. "Something's wrong with Margaret. Call Doc Harrison right now." I drifted in and out of consciousness as chaos erupted around me. Papa's worried face swam in and out of focus above me, and I could hear Mama crying somewhere in the distance. The twins appeared at the edges of my vision, their faces masks of concern that I knew were hiding very different emotions. Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, his black medical bag in hand, and his weathered face creased with worry. He had delivered me 12 years earlier and had treated every scraped knee and childhood illness since then. As he examined me in my bedroom, I could see the concern growing in his eyes. "How long has she been losing weight like this?" he asked Papa, and Mama, who hovered anxiously by my bedside. "It's been gradual," Mama replied, wringing her hands. "Over the past few months. I thought it was just normal growing pains, maybe some adolescent moodiness." Dr. Harrison pulled out his stethoscope and listened to my heart, then checked my pulse and blood pressure. Her heart rate is irregular and her blood pressure is dangerously low. This level of weight loss in a growing child is concerning. Has she been eating? "She picks at her food," Papa said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Always claims she's not hungry. We thought it was just a phase." The doctor continued his examination, checking my reflexes and looking into my eyes with a small flashlight. "Margaret," he said gently, "can you tell me how you've been feeling lately? Any stomach pain, nausea, trouble sleeping?" I glanced toward the doorway where I could see the twins standing in the hallway, ostensibly waiting for news about their beloved sister's condition. Danny caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning disguised as brotherly concern. "Just tired," I whispered. "I've been having trouble sleeping." Dr. Harrison frowned and made notes in his little black book. "The sleep troubles. Are they nightmares? Bad dreams that wake you up?" The question hit too close to home. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Any particular themes to these nightmares?" Sometimes children develop anxiety about specific things that manifest in their dreams. I could feel the twins' eyes boring into me from the hallway. Their presence was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. "I don't remember them very well," I lied. Dr. Harrison spent another 20 minutes examining me, checking for physical causes of my dramatic decline. Finally, he packed up his medical bag and asked to speak with my parents privately downstairs. As they left my room, the twins immediately slipped inside and closed the door behind them. "That was very good, Maggie," Danny said softly, approaching my bed with that predatory smile I had learned to fear. "You're learning to keep family business private." Davy sat on the edge of my bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip toward I. Him. Though we are a little concerned about you passing out like that. We need you to stay healthy after all. We have so many more special times planned for us. Their casual discussion of my deteriorating health, as if it were merely an inconvenience, to their plans rather than a sign of serious trauma, made me feel sick. I turned my face toward the wall, trying to shut out their voices, but Danny grabbed my chin and forced me to look at him. "Dr. Harrison seems very concerned about you," he said, his voice taking on that falsely sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "He's probably going to recommend some kind of treatment, maybe even suggest you go away somewhere to get better." The threat was clear. If medical intervention threatened to separate me from them or expose what was happening, there would be consequences. "We wouldn't want anything to happen to Papa while you were away getting help," Davy added, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm that made me want to scream. "Farm work can be so dangerous. Accidents happen all the time." They left me alone then, confident that their message had been received. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the muffled conversation taking place downstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the concern in Papa's voice, the worry in Mama's responses, and Dr. Harrison's measured, professional tone. When they finally returned to my room, Dr. Harrison's expression was grave. "Margaret, I'm going to be very honest with you. Your body is showing signs of severe stress and malnutrition. If we don't figure out what's causing this and treat it soon, you could develop serious health complications." Papa sat heavily in the chair beside my bed, his face etched with worry. "The doctor thinks you might benefit from talking to someone, Princess. Someone who specializes in helping children who are going through difficult times." "A psychiatrist," Mama added, the word, spoken like it was something shameful. In 1959, in rural Iowa, mental health issues were not discussed openly. Seeing a psychiatrist was often viewed as evidence of weakness or moral failing. "There's a doctor in Des Moines," Dr. Harrison explained. "Dr. Elizabeth Foster. She's had excellent results working with young people who are struggling with anxiety and depression. I think she might be able to help us understand what's troubling you." The suggestion of psychiatric care terrified me, but not for the reasons my parents might have expected. I was afraid of what I might reveal under professional questioning, afraid of the consequences if the truth came out. But I was also desperate for help, for someone who might understand the hell I was living in. "I don't want to see a psychiatrist," I said quickly, glancing toward the door where I could sense the twins listening. "I'm fine. I just need to eat more and get better sleep." Dr. Harrison studied my face carefully. "Margaret, in my experience, children who are fine don't lose 30 pounds in 4 months and collapse while doing routine chores. Something is causing you significant distress, and we need to identify it before your health deteriorates further." The next 2 weeks were a battle of wills between my parents' growing concern and my terror-induced resistance to seeking help. Dr. Harrison recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation, but I refused to cooperate. I claimed I was feeling better, forced myself to eat larger portions at meals despite my complete lack of appetite, and tried to hide the severity of my ongoing nightmares. The twins, meanwhile, intensified their psychological pressure. They seemed to sense that their control was being threatened by outside intervention, and they responded by becoming more possessive and more violent. The abuse escalated in both frequency and brutality, as if they were trying to reassert their dominance over me before anyone could interfere. "If you tell that psychiatrist anything about our special relationship," Davy whispered to me one night after a particularly vicious assault in the root cellar, "we'll make sure Papa has an accident." With the tractor, farm machinery can be so unpredictable. The threats became more specific and more frequent. They described in graphic detail what they would do to Mama, Papa, and even our farm animals if I revealed their secret. They painted scenarios of our family's destruction that were so vivid and terrifying that I became convinced they would actually carry them out. But my body was betraying me. Despite my efforts to appear normal, my health continued to deteriorate. I developed a persistent tremor in my hands that made it difficult to write or hold eating utensils. My hair was falling out in larger patches, requiring Mama to take me to the beauty parlor for a shorter haircut to disguise the bald spots. Most alarming of all, I began having what Dr. Harrison called episodes. Periods where I would become completely unresponsive, staring blankly into space for minutes at time. The final straw came during Sunday service at Cedar Falls Methodist Church. We were sitting in our usual pew, Papa and Mama in the middle, the twins on one side and me on the other, when Pastor Williams began his sermon about the protection of innocence and the sacred bonds of family. The family unit, he intoned, from the pulpit, is the foundation of our Christian society. Parents are called to protect their children, and siblings are called to love and care for one another with pure hearts. The irony of his words, given what I endured daily from my own siblings, was too much to bear. I felt something snap inside my mind, like a taut wire finally breaking under too much pressure. The sanctuary began to spin around me, and Pastor Williams's voice became a distant echo as my vision tunneled and darkened. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor of the church aisle, surrounded by concerned faces and worried voices. Papa was holding my head in his lap while Mama fanned me with her church program. Dr. Harrison, who attended the same church, was checking my pulse and looking gravely concerned. "That's it," Papa said, his voice firm with decision. "No more arguments. We're taking her to Des Moines tomorrow. Whatever is wrong with our little girl, we're going to find out and fix it." As willing hands helped me to my feet and guided me out of the sanctuary, I caught sight of the twins' faces in the crowd. For the first time since the abuse began, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear that their carefully constructed web of control was about to be exposed. That night, as I lay in my bed knowing that tomorrow would bring the psychiatric evaluation I had been dreading, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't hope exactly. I was still too afraid for that. But it was the smallest crack in the wall of despair that had surrounded me. The tiniest possibility that someone might finally see through the facade and understand what was really happening to me. The storm that had been building for months was finally about to break, and I had no idea whether it would destroy everything in its path or finally wash away the poison that had been slowly killing me from the inside. The drive to Des Moines on that cold Monday morning in late November felt like a journey to another world. Papa drove our old Ford pickup truck while Mama sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap and her face etched with worry. I huddled in the back seat, wrapped in one of Mama's quilts, watching the familiar farmland of Cedar Falls give way to the expanding cityscape of Iowa's capital. The twins had not come with us, a decision that Papa made at the last minute. "This is something Margaret needs to do without distractions," he had told them that morning. "You boys stay here and take care of the farm chores. We'll be back this evening." I had seen the flash of panic in their eyes when Papa announced they wouldn't be accompanying us. For months, they had never let me out of their sight for extended periods, always ensuring that one or both of them was present to monitor my interactions with adults. This separation, this loss of control, terrified them more than anything that had happened yet. Dr. Elizabeth Foster's office was located in a converted Victorian mansion near downtown Des Moines. The building had been painted a soothing pale, yellow with white trim, and the interior had been designed to feel more like a comfortable home than a medical facility. Soft Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, and the waiting room was furnished with overstuffed armchairs and tables displaying children's books and magazines. Dr. Foster herself was nothing like what I had expected. In 1959, most doctors were men, and the few female physicians I had encountered were stern, matronly figures who seemed more intimidating than comforting. But Dr. Foster was probably in her mid-30s, with kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a soft blue dress rather than a white coat, and when she shook my hand, her grip was gentle but confident. "Hello, Margaret," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that I would later learn was from her childhood in Boston. "I'm Dr. Foster, but you can call me Elizabeth if you prefer. I understand you've been having a difficult time lately." She invited my parents and me into her office, which looked more like a cozy library than a medical consultation room. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on psychology, child development, and what appeared to be poetry and literature. A small fire crackled in the fireplace, and the afternoon sunlight streamed through lace curtains, creating patterns of light and shadow on the Persian carpet. "Why don't we start by having Margaret tell me, in her own words, how she's been feeling lately?" Dr. Foster suggested, settling into a chair across from the sofa where my parents and I sat together. For the first 20 minutes, I gave the same, rehearsed responses I had been giving to Dr. Harrison. I was tired, having trouble sleeping, not very hungry, but basically fine. Just normal growing pains. Nothing to worry about. I could feel Papa and Mama watching me anxiously, hoping that this expensive specialist would be able to identify some simple problem that could be easily fixed. But Dr. Foster was more persistent and more skilled than our family doctor. She asked follow-up questions that I hadn't anticipated, probed gently at inconsistencies in my responses, and seemed to see through the carefully constructed facade I had been maintaining for months. "Margaret," she said after I had finished my standard explanation, "I'd like to talk with you privately for a while, if that's all right with your parents. Sometimes young people find it easier to discuss their feelings when adults they're close to aren't in the room." Papa started to object. He was protective of me and didn't like the idea of leaving me alone with a stranger. But Mama placed a gentle hand on his arm. "William," she said quietly, "if this is what Dr. Foster thinks is best, we should trust her professional judgment." After my parents left the room, the atmosphere immediately felt different. Dr. Foster moved to a chair closer to mine, her posture open and non-threatening. "Margaret," she said softly, "I want you to know that everything you tell me in this room is confidential. That means I won't share it with your parents or anyone else unless you give me permission, or unless I believe you're in immediate danger." The word danger seemed to hang in the air between us. I felt something crack inside my chest, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. "I've been working with children and teenagers for almost 10 years, Dr. Foster continued, and I've learned to recognize certain patterns. The weight loss, the insomnia, the episodes of dissociation that Dr. Harrison described. These are often signs that something traumatic is happening in a young person's life." I stared at my hands, which were trembling slightly in my lap. The word traumatic felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't even known existed. "Sometimes," Dr. Foster said, her voice becoming even gentler, "the trauma comes from outside the family, bullying at school, a frightening experience in the community, or witnessing something disturbing. But sometimes, tragically, the trauma comes from within the family itself." My head snapped up to meet her eyes, and I saw understanding there. Not judgment, not disbelief, but a kind of professional compassion that told me she had heard stories like mine before. "Margaret," she said, leaning forward slightly, "has someone in your family been hurting you?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. For months, I had been convinced that no one would believe me, that the twins' version of events would always be more credible than mine. But Dr. Foster's gentle, matter-of-fact tone suggested that she not only would believe me, but that she expected to hear exactly this kind of revelation. "I can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "If I tell, they'll hurt Papa. They promised they would." Dr. Foster's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten slightly on the arms of her chair. "Who is they, Margaret? Who has been threatening your father?" The dam inside me was cracking, hairline fractures spreading through months of carefully maintained silence. "My brothers," I said, the words coming out like a sob. "Danny and Davy. They said if I ever told anyone about what they do to me, they would make sure something happened to Papa. A tractor accident or something." "What do they do to you, Margaret?" Dr. Foster asked, her voice remaining calm and professional even as her eyes filled with compassion. And then it all came pouring out. Months of suppressed horror, fear, and shame erupted from me like a dam bursting. I told her about that first day in the hayloft, about the systematic abuse that followed, about the threats and manipulation and the elaborate facade of normalcy they had constructed. I told her about the isolation, the destruction of my friendship with Sarah, the constant fear that governed every moment of my existence. Dr. Foster listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but never breaking eye contact. She didn't gasp or exclaim or show shock. She simply received my story with the professional composure of someone who understood that her reaction could determine whether I continued talking or shut down completely. When I finally finished, exhausted and shaking from the effort of putting my nightmare into words, Dr. Foster was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a box of tissues, placing it within my reach. "Margaret," she said finally, "I want you to know that what you've just told me took tremendous courage. And I want you to understand that none of what happened to you was your fault, not any of it." The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. For months, I had been carrying guilt and shame, wondering if I had somehow invited or deserved the abuse. The twins had been so skilled at making me question my own perceptions, my own innocence. "But they said," I began. "Whatever they said to make you feel responsible was a lie," Dr. Foster interrupted gently but firmly. "Adults who abuse children are very skilled at making their victims feel guilty and ashamed. It's one of the ways they maintain control. But the truth is that you are the victim here, not the perpetrator." She spent the next hour helping me understand the dynamics of sexual abuse, explaining how perpetrators use threats, manipulation, and gaslighting to maintain their control over victims. She validated my experiences, confirmed that my physical and emotional symptoms were normal responses to trauma, and began to outline a plan for my protection and recovery. "The first thing we need to do," she said, "is ensure your safety. That means your parents need to know what's been happening, and we need to involve law enforcement." The thought of telling Papa and Mama filled me with renewed terror. "They'll be so ashamed of me," I whispered. "They'll think it's my fault." "Margaret," Dr. Foster said, her voice firm, "your parents love you. When they learn what your brothers have been doing to you, they're going to be angry. But they'll be angry at Danny and Davy, not at you. They're going to feel guilty for not protecting you, not ashamed of you." When Dr. Foster called my parents back into the room, I could see the anxiety written across their faces. They had been sitting in the waiting room for over 2 hours, probably imagining all sorts of terrible diagnoses. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Foster began, "Margaret has been very brave today and has shared some information that explains her recent health problems. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but it's important that you understand what your daughter has been enduring." Papa's face went pale, and Mama gripped his hand tightly as Dr. Foster explained, in clinical but clear terms, what I had revealed about Danny and Davy's abuse. She was careful to emphasize that I was the victim, that none of it was my fault, and that my symptoms were normal responses to prolonged trauma. The silence that followed her explanation was deafening. Papa's face had gone from pale to red to a color I had never seen before, a kind of grayish-white that made him look suddenly old and fragile. Mama was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at me with an expression of heartbreak and guilt. "My God," Papa whispered finally, his voice barely audible. "My own sons. How did I not see it? How did I not protect her?" "Papa," I said, reaching for his hand. They were very careful. They made sure you and Mama never suspected anything. But Papa pulled away from my touch, not in rejection but in horror at his own failure. I should have known, he said, his voice breaking. A father should know when his child is being hurt. I failed you, Princess. I failed you completely. Dr. Foster intervened before Papa's guilt could overwhelm the conversation. Mr. Thompson, predators who abuse children are often very skilled at maintaining facades of normalcy. The fact that you didn't suspect what was happening doesn't make you a bad parent. It makes Danny and Davy skilled manipulators. The drive home that evening was conducted in complete silence. Dr. Foster had insisted that we contact the sheriff's department immediately, and Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley was scheduled to meet us at our farm that evening to take my formal statement and arrest Danny and Davy. As we pulled into our farmyard, I could see the twins waiting on the front porch, their faces masks of concern as they rushed to meet us. But there was something different in their eyes now, a wariness that suggested they sensed the fundamental shift that had occurred during our absence. "How did it go?" Danny asked, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness I had learned to recognize as a warning sign. "What did the doctor say about our Maggie?" Papa climbed out of the truck slowly, like an old man carrying an unbearable weight. When he looked at his sons, his face was filled with a mixture of disgust and heartbreak that made the twins take an instinctive step backward. "Get in the house," Papa said, his voice deadly quiet. "All of you. We need to have a family meeting." And, as we walked toward the front door, I saw the exact moment when Danny and Davy realized that their carefully constructed world of secrets and lies was about to come crashing down around them. The confrontation in our living room that evening was unlike anything our farmhouse had ever witnessed. Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley arrived just as the sun was setting, his patrol car's headlights cutting through the November darkness as he pulled into our yard. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s who had known our family for years, and I could see the disbelief and anger warring in his expression as Papa briefly explained the situation. When we all gathered in the living room, the twins still had no idea what was coming. They sat on the sofa where they had spent countless evenings as seemingly normal teenagers, their faces showing confusion and growing concern as they noticed the deputy's presence and our parents' grim expressions. "Boys," Papa began, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "we need to discuss what you've been doing to your sister." I watched as the color drained from both their faces, the careful masks of innocence finally slipping to reveal the fear beneath. Danny tried one last desperate gambit, his voice taking on that false confusion he had perfected over the months. "What are you talking about, Papa? We haven't done anything to Maggie except take care of her like you asked us to." But Papa was no longer the man who could be fooled by their manipulations. Dr. Foster's explanation had opened his eyes to the elaborate deception that had been playing out under his own roof. "Don't," Papa said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare lie to me anymore. Margaret has told us everything you did to her, every threat you made, every time you violated her trust and her body." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the old clock ticking on the mantelpiece, the distant lowing of cattle in the barn, and my own heart hammering against my ribs. The twins looked at each other, having one final silent conversation before their world collapsed completely. Deputy Bradley stepped forward, his handcuffs already in his hands. "Daniel and David Thompson, you're under arrest for the sexual assault of a minor. You have the right to remain silent." What happened next was chaos. Davy broke down completely, sobbing and begging for forgiveness while insisting they had never meant to hurt me. Danny, true to his nature as the more manipulative twin, tried one last attempt to control the narrative. "She wanted it," he said desperately as the deputy handcuffed him. "She came on to us. We were just trying to teach her about love." Papa lunged forward with a roar of rage that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. It took both Deputy Bradley and Mama to restrain him from attacking his own son. "You sick, twisted, Papa's voice broke as the full horror of what his boys had done finally hit him. As the patrol car's taillights disappeared down our farm road, carrying my brothers away forever, our family entered a new and difficult chapter. The local newspapers picked up the story within days. Twin brothers arrested in farm family abuse case. And suddenly our private nightmare became public knowledge throughout Cedar Falls and beyond. The legal proceedings that followed were swift by 1960s standards. Both Danny and Davy were tried as adults despite being only 16, the severity of their crimes and the premeditated nature of the abuse weighing heavily in the prosecution's favor. Davy accepted a plea bargain and received 12 years in state prison. Danny, maintaining his innocence to the end, went to trial and received 15 years. But more importantly than the legal justice was the personal healing that began almost immediately. Dr. Foster recommended a colleague in Iowa City who specialized in treating trauma victims, and once a week Papa would drive me the hour each way for my therapy sessions. Those sessions, combined with the unwavering support of my parents, slowly began to rebuild what the twins had destroyed. The process wasn't easy or quick. For months, I continued to have nightmares and panic attacks. There were days when the shame and confusion felt overwhelming, when I wondered if I would ever feel normal again. But gradually, with professional help and family love, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that I thought were lost forever. Papa struggled with his own guilt and anger for years. He blamed himself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting me from dangers that existed within our own home. He sold the farm in 1961 and moved our family to a small house in Iowa City, saying he couldn't bear to live in the place where such terrible things had happened to his little girl. Mama threw herself into my recovery with fierce determination. She attended every therapy session, read every book about trauma recovery she could find, and became my strongest advocate and protector. She also returned to school herself, eventually, becoming a social worker who specialized in helping other families affected by abuse. My healing accelerated when I started high school in Iowa City, where nobody knew my story, and I could begin to build a new identity beyond the girl who was abused by her brothers. I made genuine friends for the first time since Sarah Anderson, participated in school activities, and slowly learned to trust people again. I met my future husband, James Mitchell, during my senior year. He was patient and kind, never pushing me to share more than I was comfortable with. When I finally told him my story, on a spring evening in 1964, he held me while I cried and promised that he would spend his life helping me feel safe and loved. We married in 1966, and our wedding was a celebration not just of our love, but of my survival and recovery. Papa walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and Mama beamed with pride as she watched her daughter embrace a future she had once thought impossible. James and I had 3 beautiful children, Rebecca in 1968, Thomas in 1970, and Jennifer in 1973. Raising them taught me about the pure, protective love that should exist between family members, and helped me understand even more clearly how twisted and wrong my brother's version of love had been. I became a teacher, inspired by Dr. Foster's example and my own desire to help children who might be struggling with secrets too terrible to share. Over my 30-year career, I helped dozens of students who were dealing with abuse, neglect, or family trauma. My own experience, as painful as it was, gave me insights and compassion that made me effective at recognizing signs that others might miss. Danny was released from prison in 1975 after serving 14 years. He attempted to contact me once, sending a letter to my childhood address that Papa forwarded with a note saying I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to. I chose to read it and found a rambling, self-justifying message that showed he had learned nothing from his years of incarceration. I threw it away and never heard from him again. Davy was released in 1972 and, unlike his twin, seemed to have genuinely reflected on his crimes. He sent me a letter in 1980, a simple, heartfelt apology that acknowledged the harm he had caused. and expressed hope that I had been able to build a good life despite what he had done. I chose not to respond, but I appreciated the acknowledgement of responsibility in a way that Danny had never provided. Papa passed away in 1985, having lived to see his grandchildren grow and thrive. In his final years, he often told me how proud he was of the woman I had become, how amazed he was by my strength and resilience. Mama followed him 5 years later, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who adored her. Today, at 77 years old, I look back on a life that was shaped but not defined by those terrible months in 1959. I have been married to James for 58 wonderful years. Our children have given us 7 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, filling our lives with joy and laughter. The trauma never completely goes away. There are still moments when a smell or a sound can transport me back to that hayloft or that storage shed. But those moments are rare now, overwhelmed by decades of love, achievement, and purpose. I'm sharing this story today because I want other survivors to know that healing is possible, that a life of meaning and joy can emerge from even the darkest circumstances. If you're trapped in your own nightmare of abuse, please know that it's not your fault, that you deserve help, and that there are people who will believe you and protect you. To the children who might be watching this, remember that your body belongs to you, that adults who ask you to keep special secrets are not acting out of love, and that there are always people willing to help if you find the courage to reach out. My name is Margaret Thompson Mitchell. I am a survivor, and I'm here to tell you that no matter how dark your situation seems right now, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helps even one person find the courage to seek help or break free from their own nightmare, then sharing these painful memories will have been worth it. God bless you all, and remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and worthy of all the love and protection in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.